Welcome to Code for Humans. Today we are going to be building a very simplistic stock tracker. So this isn't an analysis tool or anything like that. All it does is it tracks how much we are buying stuff for, how much we're selling it for, and how much of that item did we buy. So to show you, I'm going to say I want to buy a stock, let's say willow logs, and I'm going to buy them for $10, sell them for $11, and I'm going to buy 10 of them. So if this sells, I'll make $1 on each one, and then I bought 10 of them, so I'll make $10. So, obviously not super realistic for the actual stock market, but as a good coding exercise, I thought this would be a cool project to do. So when I hit submit, it's going to go into an Excel sheet. So you can see here, we just bought willow logs for $10, sold them for $11, and we bought 10 of them. So I know Excel is a bad database, but for learning purposes, it's very lightweight and easy to get into, and Excel is massively popular, and there's no disputing that. So we're going to be using Python 3 to interface with Excel to build this entire project. To start off, I want to say I'm going to be using Sublime Text 3 to build this out. It's just my preferred text editor, but you can use Idle, which comes with Python. You could use Notepad if you want. It's really your choice. I'm just going to be using Sublime Text 3. And what we've done so far is we've just made an empty folder. I'm calling this Stock Tracker YouTube. And the first thing I like to do with any software project is create a to-do list. This will give me a clear defined path forward as well as keeping me organized. So I'm going to save this as todo.txt. And there's really only three things we need to do in this project. We need to design the graphical user interface, design the database that it's going to interact with, and then build the backend for the graphical user interface. Basically, make the interface talk with the database. So those three things are what we need to do. So to start off, looking at the GUI, I've already designed it, and there's a million tools that you can use to design graphical interfaces these days. I'm just going to use Paint. It's free, it's available. I'm sure if you're on Linux or Mac, it's very easy to find alternatives, but here we go. So effectively, this is what I like to do at the start of a project. I just make very quick and simple schematics, if you want to call it that, for the project. So here we have a skinny tall window, and we're going to have the title, the item name, and then a little text field to type in the name. Buy price, a text field to type in the buy price, and so on for sell price, quantity, and lastly, we'll have a submit button. So now that I know all the parts of the GUI, I can design a database to reflect that. So what that means is, we can actually just do this in the same window. So I'll say database headers. So what are going to be the columns at the top of my database? So if we want to cheat a little bit, we can look back at the finished product and see we have ID, item name, buy price, sell price, and quantity. So we have ID and then these four text fields. And that's really all we need. So ID, which we will calculate, and then everything from the GUI. So effectively, we have 5 columns in our database, and that's all we really need to do. So now we've designed the GUI and the database. Now we just need to work on implementation and writing the code for both. Okay, so we are going to be using tkinter to build the graphical user interface using Python. Tkinter is a module that is built into Python, so when you install Python, you automatically get tkinter. And today, that's what we will be using just because it's widely available and not too hard to use. So I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to call this stock tracker GUI.py. So the first thing I want to do is import tkinter. So I'm going to say import tkinter as tk. So why did I say as tk? I don't really know. If you go on Stack Overflow and common forum pages, you'll see stuff like this a lot, and it's just convention at this point. So I followed the convention because it's useful. You might actually have to import it as TK. It depends on if you're in Python 2 or Python 3. It gets very fuzzy, so I don't get too concerned about that kind of stuff. Again, not having perfect understanding of this is fine, but being able to use it is what actually matters. So the first bit of this code doesn't make a lot of sense, but just stick with me for a minute and I'll clear it up. So I'm going to say class main window, and this is going to be the class that defines how the GUI should be made. So we're making the blueprint for the actual GUI that our user will interact with. So the first thing I want to say is def init. So I'm making the constructor for this class, and I'm going to say self master. So then I'll say I'll make that master a instance variable by saying self.master is equal to master. And what is master? So we'll get to that now. So outside of this class, I want to actually call my class and make the window appear, because classes don't do anything by themselves. We have to actually initialize that as an object. So the way we do that is we say root is equal to tk.tk, and then my GUI, the actual graphical user interface object, is going to be equal to that class we're making up there, my window. And we're going to pass to that root, we're going to pass to that the tk object that we just made. And then we're going to say root.mainLoop. This is what actually, this line is what kicks off the GUI and makes it actually run and appear on your screen. So everything you're seeing here, I don't have memorized, I don't fully understand it, but I have notes that I can quickly reference so I can build code like this over and over again. So I don't understand all the fancy stuff going on in the background, but I know enough about it to be able to use it for the pragmatic reasons I have. So going back, the reason why we made this master is so I can say self.master.geometry, and now I can actually set how big do I want my window to be, and I can actually just pass it a string of like an XY size. So I'll say 200 wide by 280 long or tall. So now I can actually run this and see my window appear, and I'll drag it over, and now we have this window. But the first thing we want to do is we want to make a label for the title. So going back to our design, we want to work on this section. So the way we do that is, first I'm going to make LBL title, and what this is this is going to be the variable that holds the label object that holds the title to our actual window. So you don't have to call it this. You could call it like socks if you wanted to. I choose to use a 3-letter prefix for the elements of my GUI just because it's going to get confusing later if you don't. So LBL is what I use for a label, and you'll see other ones later. So then I'll call the label object from my tkinter module. And what this does is we pass it master. It needs to know what GUI am I going on. So we're, the only one we have is where we want to put it. And then I can say text is equal to title of my project. So if I run this, we don't actually see it. And that's because, while yes, we did associate this label with this GUI, we didn't say where exactly to place it. So in the next line, we'll say I want to take that title label and I want to place it at an x coordinate of 10 and a y coordinate of 10. So when I run this, we actually see the title, we see the label appear. So now what we need to do is repeat that for the other labels. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more labels. So I'm going to copy this and paste it 4 times. Now all I need to do is change a few things and we're good to go. So instead of label title, I'm going to make this label item name. And the text is going to be item name. And again, I'll change this to label item name. So if we run this again, we still don't have anything, and that's because I made a mistake. We are having all of them placed at the same coordinates. I need to change that. So we'll make this Y50. Now we have title of my project and item name. So we just need to repeat this process for the remaining 3, and I'll be back with you once that's done. Okay, so I've made those adjustments now, and we can run this, and we will get this. So now we have all of the labels put on our screen. Now the next step will be to put a text field below these bottom 4 so that we can actually type data. What we're going to do is we'll start with item name and say self.txt item name. So again, I'm electing to use the prefix txt for a text field. You don't have to do it. It won't affect your code. It's just what I'm doing. So then I'll say tk.entry, and this is the module that tkinter gives us that allows us to create those text fields. So what we need to say is master, and that's it. So then I'll say txt item name dot place, x of 10 and a y of 70. And now when we run this, we can see item name, and now I can type below it. So that's exactly what we want, and we want to do it for the 3 remaining properties. So I'll be back once that's done. As you can see, all I did was I made a text field to correspond to each label that we have. Okay, so now I've made all of the entry fields, and I also added some comments to give some visual separation of each property. So now we have label item name, text item name, label by price, text by price, and so on. So we can run this, and now we have a text field that we can type into for each of these properties. So the last thing our GUI needs is just the submit button. So the way we do that is I'll make a comment for button, self.btn, and that's what I'll use as an abbreviation for buttons, submit. And that is equal to tk.button. And we can also give this a text property, kind of like the labels, and I'll say submit. And then, like everything else, we need to place that somewhere on our GUI. So an x of 10, and we'll do a y of 230. So we can run this, and now we have everything that we need. For this next part, we're going to reference this old Excel file that I had before, but when we actually write this part, it'll be from scratch. But the important thing here is that we need to look at all the different types of data we have. So ID, that's going to be calculated. We are going to just create sequential numbers. So if I want to add another one, it's going to be 6. Item name, this can be just any string. So let's say axes, and we're buying them for 30, and it's selling them for 40, and we'll buy 5 of them. So what that tells us is when we're writing to this database, we are only appending to the end of it. So our code is not going to interact with any existing stuff. All it's going to do is add to the end of it. So we'll just keep adding transactions and keep adding transactions. But we're going to do that in kind of a weird way. So what's going to happen is we're going to overwrite this Excel file every time we write to it. So what's going to happen is, let's say I want to add a 7th column or a 7th ID. So I'm going to copy all of this, paste it into my new Excel file, and then in that new Excel file, that's where I'm going to add my actual new row. So the reason why we do this is because appending to Excel is kind of weird, and yes, we could do it, but I think it'll be easier to understand as a beginner to just take the whole thing, copy and paste it into the new file, and then append in that new file. Okay, so to keep our logic clean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to save this as database or db interface.py. So this is going to contain all the code for reading and writing into our database, our Excel file. So what we need to do is I want to define write to database, and I'm going to say pass, which just means do nothing. It's just a placeholder for now. And then we're going to have read from database. So once we have these two things, we should be good to go. So the reason we have read is that is going to take all of the existing data and we're going to give that to write to database so that it knows I need to write the existing stuff and then write the new stuff. So to begin, let's do read from database just because it's a bit more simple. So backing up just a tad, we are going to use the XLRD module. And this is a module that allows us to read from Excel files easily. And then for writing to Excel, we're going to use XLSX Writer. And if you don't have these installed already, you just have to pip install them, just like you pip install anything else. So if you don't know how to do that, plenty of videos on YouTube to show you how. So for reading from the database, I'm going to say WB for workbook. And to explain what that is, each Excel file is one workbook. And then it can have multiple worksheets within it. So you see I have sheet 1, sheet 2. For our purposes, we are only going to have one sheet per workbook, so it'll make it pretty easy. Just a little bit of background because we do have to interact with that stuff. So WB is equal to xlrd.open workbook. So which Excel file are we going to open? There's a few ways we could go about deciding which file we're going to open from. I'm going to hard code something, which not good practice, but again, small project, it's okay. So I'm going to say in my current directory, which is denoted as a period, if you're unaware. So period / transactions.xlsx. So we need to make this transactions file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Excel, and then I'm going to create that workbook. So I'm going to save just a blank file, and that's going into our project folder. So I'll call this transactions. Okay, so now we have that file created. And if I click this on the side, Sublime Text will show that to me. So I have transactions made, we're good to go. So now I can actually look at the sheet within that file. So I'll call that WS is equal to the workbook I just opened. And I'm going to look at the sheet by index. So what this means is 0 is the index of the first sheet, 1 would be the index of the second sheet, and so on. But we only have one sheet, which means 0 will always get us to where we need to go. So now what we can do is start reading all of the rows out of this database. So right now there's nothing, but let's pretend like we're at the final product and we have those 5 columns. So I'm going to make a little comment. Our columns are ID, item name, buy price, sell price, and quantity. Okay, so those are the 5 things we need to get out of each row. So what I'm going to say is all the rows in my Excel file will be stored in this list. And what this is going to be is a list of lists. So each row is going to be a list, and then all rows will be a list of those lists. So if that doesn't make a lot of sense, it will shortly. But here we go. So we're going to loop through every row in there. So we actually get something called in rows, and that is given to us by the XLRD module. And this will tell us how many rows of data we actually have that aren't blank. So if we have 3 rows, in rows will be 3. So pretty straightforward. And what we're going to do is we're going to say our current row is equal to a blank list, and then we're going to add to that. We're going to append to that list the cell value of I0. So what, and to back up, this is a bit strange. This is actually the y coordinate and then the x coordinate. You generally see xy, but it's backwards for some reason. Just the people who wrote this decided to do it that way. So this means which row are we in, and then which column are we in. So this is going to be getting the ID of the current row. Okay, so now I just need to repeat this process. So if I change this to 1, this is going to be the same row, but the second column, which is going to be the item name. And then we'll have the buy price, the sell price, and the quantity. So now what we need to do is we've collected all of the information from one row and stored it in current row. So now we need to add that to our master list of rows. So we say all rows dot append current row. And then all we have to do from there is return all rows. So again, what this does is we open the file, we look at the sheet that we care about within that file, we create a master list of all the rows that's blank for now, and we go through each row of our database and we collect the data. We grab the ID, we grab the name, we get all the data, we add it to our master list, and then return the master list. So what this will do is give us every single cell that is not blank in our Excel file. So now we need to handle writing to the database. So the first thing we need to do is get all of the existing data, and then we'll create that new file and paste that existing data in, and then paste the new data in. So I'm going to say existing data is equal to read from database. It's going to be equal to that function we just made. So now we have all the data, and now we can start making the new file. So I'm going to make a new workbook, and that is equal to xlsx writer dot workbook. And again, where do we want to store this workbook? We are going to store it in the same place as before. So again, hard coding, you can definitely make this a constant variable and then reference it in multiple places. Again, we're being lazy because it's a small project just for learning, so don't have to have those concerns. So then the worksheet we're making is going to be part of that workbook, and we're going to add a worksheet. So adding a worksheet to the workbook we just defined, and we're calling it WS. So now let's write headers. So these are going to be the column headers. So our first one is going to be ID, and the way we write that is in the worksheet we want to write something. We're going to write it at position 0, 0, and what do we want to write? We want to write ID. So I'm going to duplicate that. I'll change this to a 1 and call this item name. So again, it's YX, not XY. That's why it's 0, 1 and not 1, 0. So I just need to repeat this 3 more times. Okay, so then we just need to write existing data, and then we need to write new data, and then we need to save file. So those are the 3 things left to do. So I skipped ahead a little bit and I started writing the code for existing data. It's kind of confusing, so I think some visual aids will help. So let's say this is our data, this is our existing data, so it's stored up here. So what we were saying is within my current row I want to do some actions. So how many rows am I going to loop through? Well, however many rows are in existing data. So this first line here says in my current row in the 0 column, so in the A column here, I want to write whatever was in existing data in that same row in column 0. So whatever was in A1 in the old sheet, I want to copy into A1 in the new sheet. So for the next line, we are saying for my current row, I want to write into the second column, the B column, whatever was in that same column in existing data in the B column. So what this is going to do is say, okay, row is 0, copy and paste ID, copy and paste item name, buy price, sell price, and quantity, move to the next row. ID is 1, copy and paste that over, copy and paste teak plank over, just keep copying and pasting effectively is all we're doing. Just the Python to accomplish that is just a little dirty to read. So that's all we're doing. We're just copying and pasting from like A1 to A1, from C5 to C5, just one-to-one mapping. So that's all we need to do for writing the existing data. Now we need to write the new data. So what we're going to do is we're going to write into that same worksheet, but now we need to pick the first blank row we see. So in this example, we'd want to write into column 7 because that's the first blank row we have. So if we say the length of existing data, that'll put us in the right spot. So I'll say length of existing data. And then let's write in the first column, and then we're going to write the ID. So just to explain why we can use the length here. So our length is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 long. But just because we have a length of 6 doesn't mean that the index matches up. So we have to reference by index here. So if we want to count the index, we can say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and that's our first blank row. So the length, the reason why we have this difference is because a length starts at 1, but indexes start at 0. So again, we have a length of 6, but our indexes go from 0 to 5. So that allows us to say the length of existing data will be our first blank row. So then we want our ID to be sequential. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can also just use, instead of ID, we can also just say the length of existing data. So that will put a 6 in this case. So the rest of them are going to be easier. So what we can say is, when we call write to database, we need to specify the buy price, sell price. I forgot item name. So item name, buy price, sell price, and then quantity. Okay, so now we want to say, I want to write in that first blank row, in the second column, and we're going to say the item name there. So then in the third column, we say the buy price, and I'm going to repeat that for the final two. Okay, so now we've done that. We have written all the new data. All we need to do is save the file, and we do that by calling workbook.close. And that just closes the file and saves it, and then we can actually see the changes if we open the Excel file. If we don't call this, one, it's not going to save, we're not going to see the data change, but two, it could create like some ghost processes on your computer, which might slow it down over time, at least until you restart it. So just make sure you call this .close whenever you're working with making new files. One quick change I want to make. I want to actually move the writing of headers below writing the existing data. And the reason we do that is because we want to make sure that the headers always get written properly, because if the existing data gets messed up, it could mess up our headers. So this is just a safety precaution. But yeah, that should be it for the DB interface. So now all we need to do is get the interface to actually link up with our GUI. So we'll go back to Stock Tracker GUI, and we need to make a new function. So I'll say def, let's say submit to DB. So all this is going to do is it's going to take the data from the GUI and then pass it to that write function we just made. That way it actually updates our database. So I'll give this the self keyword, and then I need to get the actual value out of my GUI. So I'll say the item name is equal to self.txt item name.get. So all this does, this get function, will pull whatever data is in our text field and return it, and we'll store that in the item name. So I'll do the same thing for buy price, except there's going to be a little difference here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and parse this. I'm going to say this can only be an integer. So I'm going to wrap that entire get call and make sure it's an integer. I'll round it if I have to. So then we'll say sell price, much of the same. We're going to make sure it's always an int. And then we'll do the same thing for the quantity. Again, always being an integer. And then all we need to do is we need to call our DB interface file. So we need to import that. So import DB interface. And now we say DB interface dot, what did we call that? Write to database? Write to database. And then we need to pass it these 4 things because again, it asks for those 4 properties. So we just collected the data here and we'll just pass it as arguments. So item name, buy price, sell price, and quantity. And hopefully we hit the run button and everything works. So we run this, we'll say item name, sharks, we bought it for $10, selling it for $13, and we bought 5 of them. So if we hit submit, nothing crashed, happy about that. So now we can go into our transactions file and see what happened. And I have this old one pulled up. Let me close that. So opening the one we just made, and we have nothing. Groovy. Absolutely groovy. So I found the issue. Very dumb issue, but you know, those happen. So we never actually made the submit button call this submit function. So to do that, all we need to do is say command is equal to submit to DB. So now we can run this. We get an error. I need to say self.submit to DB. And we still have an error. Okay, found the error. I can't spell submit. So fixing the typo, and we should be good to go. Okay, let's try this. So shark 10, 11, 12. And now we'll open the Excel file. Okay, so you can tell this didn't work as intended. We did not get our headers, and the reason for that is because we assumed that they would always be existing data, but right now the Excel workbook was just blank. So that's what caused the issue. So I'm going to actually delete this and save it, and now we're going to write provisions for what happens if we have a completely blank workbook. So back in DB interface, here we are getting existing data. I'm going to say if the length of existing data is equal to 0, so if it's blank, then we need to do something else. We need to figure out what we need to do to not break it. Okay, so I'm going to kind of live debug this. So I think what we want to do is actually, we want to change this. So if the length of existing data does not equal 0, then we will actually write the existing data. So if there's no existing data, we're going to skip over that. So then writing the headers, that should be fine all the same, and then writing new data. So if the length of existing data is 0, we're going to have an issue here. So I'm going to say if the length, oh, I didn't make this existing data. Okay, so if the length of existing data, why is it, my ID is fighting me right now. So if the length of existing data is 0, then I want to write all of this ooh, that's getting messy. Okay, I'll clean this up. So instead of writing this at the length of existing data, I actually just want to write this at position 1, and my ID will also be 1. So otherwise, I want to write it like we had it. So if we have no data, if existing data has a length of 0, we're going to write everything in the second row. So we will have our headers and then we'll have our first data. So then otherwise, if we have existing data, we will just do it like we had been. So I think that should fix our issue. So if we go back and well, first let's make sure our thing is actually empty. So transactions is empty. So we can run this. And I'll say shark 10, 11, 12, submit. No crashing, so that's a good sign. We'll open this. And now we see ID and all that's working fine. So it seems like we fixed the bug. Now let's close this. And we'll say tomato. And we'll just put in some more random values and hit submit. And now let's see if we didn't break the code that was working. Okay, so cool. We have now fixed it, and we should just be able to close this and restart it. This will be our final test. We just want to make sure we can still do everything as intended. And we'll open this up to confirm. Okay, so there we go. We are now done with the project. Here we built a GUI, we built a database, and then we linked the two together by writing a backend. So if you like this kind of content where we just make small little projects for, kind of exploring and small little testing things like that, just let me know in the comments and I'll make more like this. I just need some feedback. That way I know if I should make this into a series or if I should just stop here. So thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate it.